Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, or possibly good evening, boys and girls, as this is a children's story reading. So, without further ado, we'll go to the next thrilling instalment of Jimmy and the Pink Diamond. The trouble with crime is, it doesn't pay. So, asked Jimmy, what happened? Will they come? Boris smiled. Yes, Jim, they're on their way, but they called me madam. Do I sound like a woman to you? Grandpa Boris was in a great hurry to send Genya and Danton back to the hideaway under the bridge with the pillowcase. Everyone agreed to split up before the thieves returned. Anton and Genya would fly back with the loot, and Jim would follow them on foot. Buttercup and Buck-Buck agreed to stay behind with Boris to wait for Aloysius and the parrot to return. It would be the dog's task to hold the two thieves captive in the apartment until the police arrived. Buttercup took Genya and Anton outside to show them where he had buried the pillowcase. He dug it up. Then the two ravens took off with it. They flew slowly, partly because there was a lot of money in the pillowcase, and partly because Jimmy was slower on the ground. Jim trotted as fast as his legs could go, but he had a hard time keeping up with them. Just as they turned the corner of Leitzer Plain, Jim nearly crashed into Aloysius and Jan Dorova. Jan didn't see him. He was too worried about Aloysius, who was more than dizzy from his celebration in the Brown Horse Cafe. The only thing Aloysius wanted to do now was count his money and take a little nap. His pasty white face was now rosy from drinking too much chocolate milk with rum in it. Jan Dorova was having difficulty perching on his master's shoulder because Aloysius was swaying from side to side like a ship in a storm. The man couldn't seem to put one foot in front of the other. Jan swore at him softly, in Russian. "This is no time to be tired," he muttered viciously as he pulled his thin grey hair. Hey, stop it, will ya? What's the matter with you, Jan? His words were slurred and his tongue was thick with sleep. He staggered up the front steps, blathering on to a parrot about finding a better hiding place for all that money. "Oh, Jan, looks like we left the door open," giggled Aloysius. "We left the door open, Jan. Yes, we did. Hehe." Jan realised immediately that things weren't right. He flew off of Aloysius' shoulder, through the front door, and into the kitchen. Buttercup was waiting for him behind the dirty kitchen door. "Get him, boy." "Shh, no barking," whispered Boris. Buck and Boris were hiding under the kitchen table. Buttercup whined softly and obeyed. He jumped at Jan Dorova. His loose-lipped, deadly jaws snapped shut on the parrot's tail feathers. Jan wrenched himself free and flew squawking back to Aloysius' shoulder again. Aloysius, who had finally made it up the stairs, was staring blankly round the room. His brain was trying to make some sense of it all. Buttercup growled, spit out a few blue feathers, and showed the man his teeth. He advanced on Aloysius with his lips curled and backed him into a corner. Aloysius grabbed a nearby chair and threatened him with it. Stay back, I say," he spluttered the poor man. He was confused, a bit in shock. His long spindly legs began to shake. Buttercup forced him into being wide awake again. "Hold him, Butters. Good dog, keep him there, my friend," Boris cried. The dog obeyed, growling and snapping his jaws at the thief like a hound of hell. Soon there was a loud knock on the front door. It was still open. Two men called out, "Police! Everybody stay where you are. Keep your hands up." When the police burst into the apartment with their sticks raised, Aloysius was so astonished that he dropped the chair he was using for protection against the angry dog. Buttercup saw his chance, leapt up, knocked him over and pinned him to the floor. He looked back at the two officers and tilted his head to one side as if to ask, "Do you want him now? Do you? Was it good?" "Great dog," said Detective Inspector Rolf Jansen, clapping his hands. "He should be on the force, Bob." The inspector was a tall, thin man. So tall, in fact, he had to have his uniforms made in a special shop. He had a kindly face, but could be utterly ruthless in his hunt for those who broke the law. His partner, Sergeant Bob Van Rijn, a head shorter than his boss, was a bit portly and had a thick brown moustache. He and Rolf were good friends. They had been solving crimes together for more than 10 years. For 7 of those years they had been hot on the heels of the master thief, the skunk. Bob de Rijn pulled Aloysius to his feet and handcuffed him. He righted the overturned chair and made him sit on it. The dirty man glared back at the young policeman. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say now may be held against you in a court of law." After he finished reading him his rights, Bob frowned at Aloysius and shook his head. Aloysius stared straight ahead and wouldn't say a word. Bob had to find a way to make him talk. "What is your full name, mate?" Aloysius said nothing. "Would you like a glass of water?" Aloysius said nothing. "Come on now, it's not so hard to talk. You're not making it easy on yourself. Go ahead, tell me why that poor dog is so angry at you. Did you hurt him? What did you beat him with, sir? Was it this broom?" Aloysius said nothing. "Well, if you're going to be that way about it, I've no choice but to charge you. First, we're arresting you for cruelty to animals. How did all this happen? You can tell me, can't you? What have you done to this fine, lovely dog? Is this your apartment? Did your wife make the call?" Aloysius still said nothing. His eyes searched the room for Jan de Rover, but the ungrateful parrot had flown straight out of the door as soon as the police arrived. After calling the station for backup, Bob used another set of handcuffs to fasten Aloysius' leg to the chair so he couldn't escape. Bob Van Rijn had to hold his nose closed. "Phew, man, when was the last time you had a shower?" Aloysius' stench was actually making him feel sick. The dirty man sat there sullenly, still refusing to answer a single question. Inspector Jansen stood next to his partner Bob and sniffed the air. The heavy odour was rather familiar to him, but he couldn't quite place it. The entire apartment reeked of old sweat, dirty socks, rotten food, cigarette smoke, and who knows what else. The air was heavy with it. Inspector Jansen went from room to room in the spacious flat, sniffing as he walked. One of the bedroom doors was locked. "There's something about that smell," he muttered more to himself than to his young partner Bob. Grandfather and Buck were still hiding under the table watching the arrest. The police hadn't seen them yet. Bob Van Rijn had turned his back to the table and, using his mobile phone, called for a police wagon to take the suspect away. The front door was still open to give the rooms a much-needed breath of fresh air. Boris whispered to Buck, "Listen, Buck, when I get his attention, you must run outside as fast as you can and wait for me round the corner by the bush." With that, he flew onto the table, cleared his voice a bit, and said, "Tell the chief inspector to look in the robber's other bedroom." Boris spoke English to the young sergeant. He did it quite well, considering that he had only spoken English out loud once in his life, and certainly never to a portly policeman who was standing right in front of him. "Who said that?" Bob gasped, whipping round towards the sound of the voice behind him. "I said, tell him to look in the other bedroom." Boris adjusted his glasses with an elegant flick of his shiny black wingtip. "There you will find wonderful treasure," he continued. Grandfather stood calmly on the kitchen table. He smiled at Bob. Bob pulled on his long brownish moustache. He couldn't really understand what was happening to him. "You talk? I mean, can you understand me, sir? Get in here, quick. You're not going to believe this, sir." Bob de Rijn shook his head again. He took his hat off and put it back on, still staring at the bird who had such elegant old-fashioned manners and who wore those smart golden reading glasses on his beak. "Of course I can talk," replied Boris proudly. "I saw the stolen treasure through the keyhole with my own eyes. The treasure is in there," he said, pointing to the other bedroom, "and I believe that the cat told me that the key is in the biscuit tin." "Rolf! Sir, please hurry!" yelled Bob with a note of desperation creeping into his voice. His hands were shaking. He was very pale.
Detective Inspector Rolf Jansen walked quickly into the kitchen, believing his partner was in some kind of trouble. "What's going on in here? Have you gotten him to say anything yet, Sergeant Rain?" "No, sir. He hasn't made a peep, sir," said Bob, pointing at Aloysius. "But, sir, that black bird was just talking to me. He wants us to go to the bedroom. He says the key's in the biscuit tin. I'm not telling Porky's, boss. Just ask him something. Look at him. See those little golden glasses on his beak? See them?" "It is kind of strange, Bob," said Rolf slowly. He could see the glasses well, but at the same time he found it hard to admit the truth to himself. "All right, Bob," laughed Jansen. "I'll play along with you. Let us question the suspect. What is your name, Mr. Bird?" "Rah!" croaked Grandfather Boris. "Rah, rah, rah." Rolf could have sworn that the old bird was grinning at him. "Bob," he said, "you need a nice little vacation, some time off. Maybe we both do." He took the biscuit tin off the shelf and looked in. There was the key lying flat at the bottom of it. "Well, I'll be darned," explained the Chief Inspector. He glanced at his partner and again at Boris, who sat quietly on the kitchen table enjoying the show. Buck had his paw over his mouth to keep from laughing aloud. He was still hiding under the table. "Now I've seen everything, Bob. I can't believe it," Rolf whispered. "Let's just keep this to ourselves, sir," muttered Bob. "We can't let them find out about this down at the precinct. You know we'd never ever live it down. We'd become the laughingstock of the whole force. We saw a talking bird, Rolf. A bird with reading glasses. He solved the case for us. I hope you realise that, sir. We can't tell a soul. I promise you, Bob, I'll never tell a living soul. Anyway, who would believe it, sir? They'd think we're both loony." "You're too right, Sergeant. Good work. You keep an eye on that skunk for me, while I'll go and rummage round in the other bedroom." "Yes, sir. Now it's our little secret, Rolf. You promised me." When Inspector Jansen left the room, Bob scowled back at Boris and said, "What's the matter with you? Why didn't you say anything to my boss? You made me feel a right fool, you horrible old bird. Why didn't you talk? Was it too much to ask?" Boris flew up to the top of the refrigerator and replied politely, "We don't have too much time left, my friend." He then called out to Buck. "Now," he said in Animish. "Go now, my dear comrade. Wait for me outside." Buck dashed out from under the table and ran down the front steps. Boris followed him, flying low across the living room and through the front door. His old heart was pounding with excitement. За то, что для другого сбудешься.